And so I'm going to record this now, and then I will send out the recording so anybody who missed it for whatever reason can take a look. So what I really want to do today is you guys hear me talking about this study. I see there's a chat here going as well. Yeah, good. You hear me talking about this study and technology assisted peer assessment and all that. And I just find it makes everything much, much more concrete when you just kind of see the technology we're talking about and get a feel for the process that I'm suggesting. So that's mostly what I'm going to do today. Start from the student perspective and just kind of walk you through what it would be like to be a student engaged in this. And in the background, I have the teacher side of the application open in another browser. So I may occasionally, especially if you guys have questions, pop over here to show you the teacher perspective, but mostly I'm going to stay here. So let me just jump right in. So I'm going to go in as demo student. And let me just, this always looks ugly when it's like this. So normally when a student comes in, what they would see, at least in the standalone version, they would see this, which would be a tile for each course that's using the technology. If it's the integrated version, they end up going right into a course. So let me just go into this course. In the integrated version, they would just launch right to this page, which is what we call the activity page. And normally, one of these activities, we have 3 steps. And thankfully for you guys, most of your work happens to set this up, but really it's the students that walk through and do most of this themselves. I'm keeping an eye on the chat window too. I am unable to see anything, says Kristen. Just because you're on with your phone, I guess. Okay, so Kristen, I am recording it, so I'm not sure if you want to just imagine. I am showing something. You're on the computer and you're not seeing it.
Actually, what I see is
Oh,
waiting to see Steve's screen.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Kristen. I just didn't realize I hadn't shared my screen. I could see it. It was fun. Okay,
There you go.
let me do this. Let me do this. There we go. Okay, so let me just back.
Oh, perfect. Now I can see. Thanks,
Yeah,
Steve.
I'll backtrack a little bit just so you have the full student experience. So the student would log in. Yeah, here. I'm going to take this off my kid's chair that I use to frame my head, right? So, demo student at peerscholar.com. So this is again the standalone that I would be showing here, and so the student would log in, and I'm just going to only show the ones they're students in. And so here we are, where they would see the tiles, one for any course that uses the technology, and I'm going to launch into this research ethics course. So this is where I was. So if you come in through the LMS, this is usually where you come into. And typically there would just be one of these bars. I've got 3 because it's just going to allow me to demo the 3 phases for you. So I've kind of replicated the activity, but it's typically one thing and it just marches along through time across these phases. So the first phase, let me just do it real quickly. The first phase is nothing all that earth-shattering, although it is kind of nice because it's a digital product. So basically, they go into the create phase that would.
Hi, Karen Holt, HOLT.
Oh, okay.
Hey guys, it would normally launch.
Is this your first time with America's Best?
No.
You come from Silver?
Yes.
I'm going to mute somebody.
I would call him.
So there we go. So it would normally launch like this, where the students would see the instructions and notice, you can do things like have a movie in the instructions. So here I'm asking them to watch this video that just sort of describes research ethics APA style, so they could watch the video right there. And then I give them some activity. And basically in this one, they're supposed to take a position and create an argument about whether it's justified to have separate ethic codes applied to humans versus animal research. And you can give them, obviously, word length stuff, things like that. Critically, by the way, just because I want to try to mimic the research project, we typically give them a rubric, so you can attach anything you want. But in this case, I've attached a rubric. And we let students know, hey, this is the rubric that's going to be used to assess your work, ultimately. And therefore, it's what you might want to look at while you're creating your work. But really in the create phase, for the most part, That's what they do. They submit something, and I've just got a little, so I'm going to pretend I'm demo student back here. So I'll just grab this and paste it in. And one of the things you'll see is we've done a lot of work just on the pasting. So if they do copy and paste, there are different options that deal with the ways these things are treated, so that you can paste in different ways. But anyway, this person pasted in their work. There it is. They could save that as a draft if they want to come back to it, or they can just save in next. The only other thing I'm modeling here, I want to show you, is that in each phase, the students do the primary task, and then if you want, you can ask them some additional questions. And so I'm going to show you in different phases, different ways that can be used. In this first case, this is sort of modeling a reflective instructor who might say, oh, I've never done this activity before, so I might want some feedback from my students. How interesting did you find the activity? How many hours did you spend working on it? You know, maybe I spent 20 hours, etc. So the student could answer those questions, save, submit, and they're done the create phase. So the create phase, nothing all that exciting. This is where it gets cool, is after that, though. So if you imagine any activity you currently do, you probably, assign it to students, they go and do the work, they send you something back, you assess it and give them feedback. What's going to happen here instead is they're going to log into this assess phase, and now they're going to be presented. So they see the instructions here that kind of walks them through the process. They again always have access to that rubric, which we still have open over here, so I'm not going to open it again. And now they jump in. So here is the peer assessment part. And what's being shown here is they are now seeing 5 submissions from their peers. So these are things that their peers submitted. They're randomly selected from the class. They're presented anonymously. And basically what we're telling them is we now want you to play the role of the instructor. And specifically, we want you to assess each of these pieces. When they assess, there's sort of 2 levels at which they assess. They can do inline comments, so they can always select text and just add things like, this is not a sentence, or not cited appropriately, or poor grammar, or whatnot. So they can do little surface level things here, but to the right, we see a much more formal assessment. And this is one of the things that the instructor has to do, is build this formal assessment. The one I've modeled here is probably what I imagine people will use in the research study. So they might begin, this is always nice to start by just asking students, what level of quality do you think this is? If you were giving this a grade, what would you give it? And they might say, I don't know, 8, something like that. They're also eventually, I'm going to skip down a little bit, they're also eventually going to be asked to provide constructive feedback. In every peerScholar activity, a big part is providing constructive feedback and responding to it well. So students are learning how to give feedback and how to react to it. This is the kind of way I like to query them usually. Think of all the ways this composition could be improved, then zero in on the one thing that, if improved, would lead to the maximum improvement of the entire composition. Tell the peer what that thing is and give them some sense of how to improve it. So the student would say, well, I think you should. And this is where they can provide their written feedback. Now, the other interesting part about the study is we really also want to have a principled use of rubrics, specifically the value rubrics that were developed by AAC&U. So what we have is a tool, and I mean, I can show it to you really quickly on this side. If we edit this activity that we're looking at right now, one of the things we've done here is create one of these matrix tools. So when we built this part, this part over here, you can just say, hey, I want a matrix, and let me just show you the matrix that I built that corresponds to that. So I just created a matrix that has these same rows as represented by this: idea, purpose, organization, etc. And then I did the scoring the same way that they score here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so you can mimic that, and in fact, you can mimic it in such a way that it is actually scoring too. So if you look in these cells, if they pick these cells, it will actually score the rubric appropriately for them. So all this to say, In this case, they would be asked to do this for each piece. First, give it a grade, score it on the rubric, which they could do, like this, so to speak. Give a constructive comment. Now, let me put on my little pedagogy hat for a moment. My little pedagogy hat, that sounds weird. Anyway, this is where the real learning is happening, because in order to perform this assessment, they have to really think critically about the work they're looking at, figure out how it could be better, think creatively to give this person advice about how to fix it, and obviously they have to communicate that all to this peer. And so they're using all these skills in a structured way, and then when they're done, they do it again for the next peer. And then they do it again for the next peer. You can decide how many peers you want them to assess. I like, in my activities, it's usually 5 or 6, because I like this repeated structured practice of using these skills. So this is the way that peer assessment kind of develops the skills, is by doing this repeated structured practice. We also, the last step is typically their own work that they submitted. And so after doing a bunch of peer assessments, we then ask them to do a self-assessment. This is all optional. You can choose to do this or not. You'll see on the teacher side, I have self-assessment checked, and I've chosen some options there. And so what I've done here is I've made you can just have them self-assess just like they peer assess, the exact same thing. I've actually changed it a little bit, said what mark would you give yourself, and then highlight one thing you learned from this experience. So I'm trying to turn this into more of a reflective kind of endeavor for students. But again, completely up to the instructor to create these assessments as they like. All right. So, I mean, that's the heart of the second phase, going through and assessing all these peers, getting the repeated structured practice, self-assessing. Let me just show you again that you can tack on these questions as students are sort of on their way out of each phase. So in this case, what I've modeled is something that we are going to be doing in the case of the research project. At this point, they've just given a bunch of ratings to peer work. That's the data we would like to use for the research project. And so right within the application, we can ask them for consent. We can give them the consent information and ask them to choose whether they want to consent to have their data used or not. The nice thing about doing it this way is we can build what we call a report into peerScholar, where it only outputs the data for those students who consented, and it anonymizes that data. So it just ensures that, if you guys do this at your institution, then we at UofT do not have any specific information about your students. Your students' privacy is protected at a very high level. So that's just another way you can ask these questions. Okay, I'm going to open the floor for a second, but I'm just going to finish the loop, sort of close the loop. So they composed something. They then assessed a bunch of peers. Now, in this case, I had them assessing 5 peers. So while they were assessing 5 peers would be also assessing them. So in this third phase, it's all about what I call receptive communication, trying to learn from feedback and in a rich, formative way if possible. So they log in, they get the instructions. The instructions basically tell them, you're going to see the feedback that your peers gave to your work. You're going to be asked to rate that feedback, to actually assess the feedback, and then you're going to be asked to use it to make your work better. And so they jump in. Now what you're seeing here, this is their work. So if I go peer by peer, you'll see that the text on the right doesn't change because this is what I submitted. But if we're at peer 1 here, this is peer 1 gave me a 6. Here's the rubric ratings they gave me. Here's the constructive feedback they gave me. And so the idea is I would read that carefully. I would think about it, and then I would ultimately assess it. And here's 2 assessments that I like to use quite a bit because they separate out the sort of emotion from the content, and I try to teach students to do that when they're dealing with feedback. So the first thing is, how useful do you think this is? So maybe they think it's very useful. But I also like something about emotional intelligence. I always work that in. So how did reading the feedback make you feel? And so if let's say they did this, angry, confused, and embarrassed, and stupid, this will eventually be echoed back to the person that gave the feedback. And if they're seeing that all of their feedback is producing these sorts of emotional states, that's telling them, maybe you should work on your tone a little bit. But whatnot. The students are going now through, they're doing this for each peer. So peer 2, they go down, they read the feedback that peer 2 gave them and assess it, etc. For peer 3. Let me put on my pedagogy hat here. So now we're talking about receptive communication, listening to others and learning from them. But once again, we're asking them to think critically about the communication, decide whether they think it's useful or not. You know, can I use this to make my work better? And so that involves creative thinking. And again, they're having to do this in a repeated, structured way. Peer by peer by peer, they go through the same process, exercising these skills as they do. Once they have assessed all the feedback, then we give them the opportunity to revise their work. Go ahead, make it better. And when I do this, it's this revised work that we're going to grade. And so they know that if they have an opportunity to make it better, they should. That's their grade involved. And so, yeah, they go in there and they can just say, oh, geez, I should have had some paragraphs here. So they can go ahead and you know, revise and make it better any way they want. Ultimately, save and submit that. Once again, just to show you the potential, there are these questions you can ask at the very end on the way out. This is one that I usually do, once again, to kind of push reflection and metacognitive skills. I basically ask them to do a letter to the editor. So you had all these people give you feedback about how your work could be better. You probably followed some of their advice and didn't follow others. Basically justify how you went about doing that. Show us that you read every bit of feedback, thought about it, and then in a principled way, either chose to revise your work in accord with it or not. And so it's perfectly reasonable to say, peer 2 said I used too many big words. I looked at my words, I think they're fine. I think peer 2 should read more. That's perfectly fine. You can do that and say that. Okay. So that is the process. Just going through, create, compose something, assess all of your peers, and then react to the feedback from your peers. Again, the cool thing is that from an instructor point of view, just to give you a sense of setting that up, what the instructor had to do was, yes, create the actual activity, you know, give them the instructions and any resources they need to do the task. You'd have to do that anyway. But then just set up the assessments, really. How do you want them to peer assess? How do you want them to self-assess? And then when you get to the third phase, do you want them to go through all the steps I described? Revise and resubmit, assessing the feedback. You can turn any of this stuff off. I kind of gave you the works. And in fact, I also added over here some of these additional assessments that you saw pop up at the end of the phases. You can add, you know, as many of those as you want. And let me just very quickly say, when you're building these assessments, it's always the same toolbox that you kind of have, which is this one. So these are the tools you have available to you. It was the matrix we used to mimic a rubric, but you can have checkboxes, drop-down menus, multiple choice, just points, stars if you want a star scale, linear if you want like a Likert kind of scale, and comments. And so these are the toolboxes you use, and maybe just give you a taste of like a Likert scale on a scale of 1 to 7, let's say, or let's make it 1 to 10 just to show it's a little more flexible. So we could go to 10, and then this could be bad, this could be good, and that'll just produce something that looks like this for students. So a Likert scale they can use to do things like that. Yeah. So that is the tool, and that is the process. And what we're trying to do with this research project is to show. I didn't highlight this as well as I should, and I perhaps should. Very quickly, let me do this. When they're assessing, and especially when they're applying the rubric to the work of their peers, this is a really powerful way. So let's say it's a rubric about critical thinking. And so the rubric kind of highlights, these are the facets of critical thinking. These are the things to look for. And so while they're assessing their peer work, they're looking for those things. This, in my mind, is a complement to what we do a lot, but we don't do this part very much. So what we do a lot is we ask them to produce things that show critical thinking. but we don't often allow them to go looking for it in the work of others. In music, we call that developing an ear, listening to others and learning from the work of others. And what we're trying to do with this project is argue that, hey, when you do that, when you ask people to apply one of these rubrics, not only does this ultimately give you a score, because remember, 5 people are going to rate me and they're all going to give me a rubric score. So we'll know how much critical thinking is in my work. So that's cool. We get a measure of it. But it also does so in a way that probably enhances the teaching of that skill as students apply that rubric. So that's what the research project is really about, is to show that this can work. This kind of process can work to both develop these skills and to measure these skills. And it can work at any level, in any context, at any institution, in any country. And so that's why we're really trying to reach out to as many colleagues as possible and say, hey, will you try this? Will you try this in your course? And we will provide the technology. In fact, if you try it, we'll provide the technology to your whole institution, hoping that it spreads a little more. But will you try it, and will you share your data with us? And so there's issues around making sure we have consent at your institution and all that kind of stuff. We have full consent at U of T. I'll quickly mention one other thing. When you're thinking about this technology and using it at your institution, I just mentioned this docs.peerscholar.com. This has all of our legal documentation and especially our what we call a risk assessment thing. So a lot of times if we want to integrate on your LMS, which makes everything easier, whoever administers your LMS will say, hey, wait a minute, we have to make sure that security and privacy and accessibility standards are all met. If they look at this risk assessment document, it gives all the answers to the questions that they usually care about. And so very quickly it tends to answer their questions and make them go, okay, that's fine. Okay, so now I'm going to shut up. Wow, we got a room full of people. That's excellent. Anybody have questions? Floor is now yours.
Yes, I actually have several, but I don't want to dominate. But one of the questions that I have, first of all, I am a really big fan of using peer review. I've been using it for years. Cool. The tool that I've been using goes through Turnitin.com. They actually have a peer review tool.
They do.
I like the interface that you just went through much more than what I see on what I have been using on Turnitin. It seems much more intuitive, clear, straightforward. So just some really good design work there. But my question though is twofold. First of all, are you able to assign specific reviewers to students' papers? And what I mean by that is I have some students who are actually writing tutors. They're really strong writers, and then I have other students who have a difficult time spelling their name. And can I couple those students?
Yeah, so how much control can you get over that peer assessment thing? So we do, I'll give you a couple of answers to that. I'm going to have to talk to Dwayne because I know he was building out the functionality to describe just what you suggest. And so I think it exists on our beta version, but I'll have to talk to him. But I will tell you by default, the way things work right now is it's random. So literally it's when people log into the assess phase, they are then randomly given, or I should say a subset of students are randomly selected for them to assess. And there's niceties about kind of doing it on the fly. It allows us to make sure we have balanced assessors and all that. We are building in an algorithm that sort of automatically does what you suggest, in the sense that if a technology is used in multiple cases, it knows the performance of students in the past, and it tries to create heterogeneous groups. It just, for exactly the intuition you suggest, it tries to mix the better performing and the not so well performing students into a group because that shows, evidence suggests that's where the learning is the best. So we're going to have it sort of do that in a natural way, but you want to do it in a much more top-down, controlled way. And that's certainly on our roadmap, and I think it's built out. But Scott, I'm going to have to get back to you on that exactly. You can do it. Yeah.
That sounds really excellent, though, by the way. I mean, having an algorithm actually do that for you is fantastic.
And let me mention really quickly. I'm back on the instructor side here. What I've shown you right now is the what we call the classic use case for this, and it's what we want to use for this research project. So it's the sort of simplest version, but I will mention that when you add an activity, you'll see that we're constantly building out other use cases. So with respect to, for example, Turnitin having a peer review system, they do. A lot of LMSs do. And the core of our research project would probably work in any of those contexts. But what we really want to do is harness that power of peer assessment and make it usable in as many contexts as possible. And so we're creating out these different, what we call pedagogical models. And as you see, this one's in beta group work, but the idea that students can work in groups, submit and assess in groups, but then also assess each other's individual contribution to a group project, because that makes group work work. But we're adding a presenter model. We're adding all these other approaches here. So the real difference, I think there's really maybe three differences between us and other peer assessment tools. One of them is that we try to do things in a very structured, evidence-based way. We try to kind of walk students through the process that the literature suggests has the maximum impact, and we've actually done a lot of research ourselves to show our approach works. The second thing is it's just much more complex. It's much more flexible. You can do all sorts of things that we kind of like. If you were creating a new activity, we try to walk this line of, here's the basics. You just have to go up and down this list and do the things you need. But over here, there are all these other options that you can play with and do things. And this is where we allow the power user, and I already sense you're a power user, to get in there and play with a lot of other fancy stuff to get a lot of control over how things roll out, including grading as well. I could have a whole talk on how you can grade things, but there's different, from expert given grades to actually using average peer ratings or giving them marks for participation, things like that. You can assign grades to different TA groups or assign students to different TAs if you want to do things like that. So it's really, I think we've taken a concept that other people have kind of added on to their application, and we've just made it the focus, I think, is the real story.
My other question was, so my students are submitting a research essay to me on the 26th, and it's going through Blackboard with the Turnitin integration. If I export that as a zip file, would I be able to import that into peerScholar so then I could use this as the primary means of running my peer review?
Yeah. Okay, so once again, there's a guy, Rob, who works with me, who does all of our integration and all of our systems talking to systems stuff. So he would be the one we would have to see. I don't know of anyone who's gone LMS to Turnitin to peerScholar, but that doesn't mean it won't work. But what I know a lot of people do is they ask their students to submit to both locations, which isn't optimal. But they say, okay, submit it to Turnitin, but also submit it to peerScholar at the same time, and then follow through peerScholar. As far as integration, peerScholar is what's called LTI 2.0, and basically that means all of the major LMSs we can integrate literally in about 10 minutes. Well, it's not even 10 minutes. It's like 3 things that the person has to enter, do a little bit of testing, and it works. So integration is no problem whatsoever. It would be just what I'm worried about more is the Turnitin and peerScholar talking to one another. Yeah.
Does this offer any of the features? I mean, the reason I use Turnitin obviously is for the plagiarism check, but also it checks some grammar. It's not terribly good at it, I don't think, but it gives students some grammatical suggestions.
Yeah.
I'm assuming this product does not have any of that functionality.
So we're building in a plagiarism detection. It's a different sort. We can have fun talking about all this stuff, but it's more what's called the multiple voices approach. So using latent semantic analysis, all these things we know from psychology, you can actually detect whether it feels like something was written by multiple people, whether the way they use the words change at various points. And you can easily check on quotation and that kind of stuff. So what our idea, though, that's a little different, is we want to reflect this back to the student when they submit. We want to basically tell them, hey, we have some worries about your work, and here's where the worries are. So maybe you want to go and reword all this, and maybe you want to. So the check is more for the student and back to the student, helping them learn not to plagiarize rather than busting them for plagiarizing. I don't know. This is a bit of a pet peeve for me. I don't know if other people feel this, but you think of all the things that our institution should be using educational technology to do. And for me, it's like develop critical thinking and communication and all this stuff. It seems like what we prioritize is busting students cheating. And, it's relevant. I get it. But for me, it's maybe 10th on my list of priorities of what I want them to gain from our education. So we do want to integrate it. All this to say, we want to integrate it our way. And we're working on that. That's on the roadmap too. That's being developed in the background. But we really do research every step of the way. And I think I could just, if you were, okay, let me do it. If you go to this vision.peerscholar.com, we sometimes, well, actually we develop things pretty quick, but we always like to make sure that every feature that we've added or whatnot is backed up by research. So we have our papers here, and I would suggest this first one is a great one to check out, where you can see some of the evidence that supports what we're doing. And so even with the plagiarism detection and stuff, once we build it in, we'd like to do some research on it before we roll it out. We want to make sure it's helping students and really helping them reach the goals that we want them to reach.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of fun. This is sort of the pride of my professional career, I think.
Yeah, you should be very proud. This is really
great. It's great to be able to work with so many other people like yourselves too, to try to, get this stuff out there. I think you're absolutely right. Peer assessment is super powerful, and whatever tool people are using to do it, I think it's, that's one of the tools we should be all leveraging. And there's lots of tools out there now. Ours is just one, for sure. Alva.
Well, if I can break in a second, Alva here. I've been in for 15 minutes. I'm super impressed.
Excellent.
How's scalability? How big can you run a class?
Oh, well, my class is 1,700 students currently. Let me give you a taste of that, actually. Give you a taste of a couple things. So here's my LMS. Let me make sure I'm just still logged in. I am. So we're now we just went to Canvas. We call it Quarkus. I don't know, some student named it, but it's actually Canvas. And so this is the activity students are now doing. One of the things you'll see when I launch this, it's going to take 2 minutes or so because it's 1,700 students. So from the faculty side, it takes a while. I've also used this in my MOOC, where there was upwards of 6,000 students, I think, using it the first time. This is what you're seeing right now is the extent of the pain. It's a pain never felt by students. When they log in, it always goes smooth. But when the professor logs in, simply because it has to populate the whole student, it takes a little bit of time.
We're having a different kind of scale problem in the sense that when we do detailed grading, we simply don't have time for it. And it is killing us at this point in certain places. Now, I'm an IT person. We teach computer science, but on the other hand, we have an ethics of information technology course, which is really an essay course.
Yeah.
We have an ethics of robotics course, which is really an essay course. And we actually have other things which can't scale right now because they're essay courses. For example, the design of large-scale distributed systems is actually an essay course.
Okay.
So that keeps it down at 20 because we can't grade the darn papers.
I have an answer for you. I'm not sure it'll work at your institution, and I'll show you some stuff on the internet you have to be a little worried about. But when you do student grading, actually, let me do this over here because I don't want to mess up my live class. Sorry, I'll go over here. Go to one of these, and I'm going to set up grading not configured, edit grading. Okay, so you have these different options. The first one is having a TA or somebody literally go through and provide grades. But this one, peer ratings, We have research, and a number of other people who do research on peer assessment have also replicated this, that as long as a given piece of work is graded by 5 or more peers, five to six seems to be the sweet spot, then the average of their ratings correlates really well with the ratings provided by teaching assistants. And so you can literally, within this, say, I'm going to produce grades that are based on the student provided grades. And you can specify whether you want averages or, so here's your calculate by. So do you want mean, median, mode, drop the highest and lowest? This is what we call the Olympic method. They do it a lot in the Olympics. So you can literally produce means. And so you could have a written assignment every week, and they would get back comments from their peers, and they would get an average peer grade. It's totally valid, but here's the potential concern. This is how we began using this, and our teaching assistants union, it is unionized here in Canada, said, hey, anybody who grades work at the university is part of our union. So if you're having students providing grades to each other, you must pay them as TAs. We battled this. Yep, we had a legal battle and we lost. That's how the courts sort of came down. So it's just U of T binding, University of Toronto. But we can have students do it, but we have to pay them $35 an hour to do it. So when we do it, we tend to not use peer ratings. We tend to have literally the instructor or the TAs do the grading. But that is the solution, and that's the solution that.
Yeah, well, that is a scary fact. We're half unionized. One of our schools is unionized, the other school is not. Teaching assistant wise. So far, the teaching assistants have not tried to interfere with the use of undergraduate teaching assistants. The union has only claimed dominion over graduate teaching assistants, but that's darn scary. That they would literally try to enforce dominion over a peer grading policy.
It's not like they like grading either, but. But yeah, no, I don't know. I could tell you whole stories about this, but I'd gotten everybody to the point in these negotiations where the university had agreed they would never reduce TA hours, and in fact would increase TA hours by, I think it was 10% anytime this was used, because they believed in the pedagogy. And that meant the TAs, rather than grading, could be having office hours or doing tutorials or other stuff that would benefit both them and the students. And still the teaching assistants union would not accept it, because once they have a bargaining chip, they don't trade it lightly. And so they know if this is something the university wants, they'll wait till there's something they want bad.
Well, that's frightening. And what I need to do here is to get this employed before they even know about it, because once it's deployed, they're not going to be able to deal with it.
Well, I would love to help you on that road.
Yeah. Can I
I see immediate application for any course that's large with essay content.
Yep.
And I also see immediate application for certain kinds of code review.
Yep.
In the sense that you understand that in computer science, a program is in fact a deliverable.
Yeah.
Certain kinds of code review, I think this would do well for as well.
It's used at, so University of Toronto, by the way, where it's kind of been in our ecosystem for the longest, it is now used at like 50 plus courses per term, and they are across the board. They certainly include computer science, but they include like economics and medicine and nursing and the Rotman Business School. You might have seen that one of the activities there was a case study. We have a special model for case studies because they insisted on a certain approach to be who assessed who. So yeah, it's used across the board, and certainly it's used in computer science in exactly the way you suggest.
Yeah. Let me ask you a stupid question. We are thinking about rolling out an ethics module in every course in the curriculum. This would be an essay-based module. And the question is it possible to use this for a small piece of a course if we have a coherent plan for each of these ethics modules, that it's going to actually take a week to do, and that we're going to use this kind of technology for that, and then we're going to go back to normal function-based grading for code for the rest of the thing. Is that an unreasonable model?
No, not at all. Part of the integration, of course, with this is grade passback and stuff like that. So no, if you did part of it using this, those
Hmm.
those grades would just go back and become part of your grade book, and anything else you use could be.
Yeah, we're a Canvas shop, by the way.
Yeah.
We just rolled it out. It's brand new for us. We're not really using it a whole hell of a lot, not using everything in it, but we do expect interoperability with Canvas.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. And do you know do you know about LTI standards and where it's at?
Yes, I know about them.
So as long as for us, as long as anything's 1.1 and above, we can
Yeah.
advance with it, no problem. We're
Well,
2.0.
well, I have to go to another meeting,
Absolutely.
but I am very pleased to have been involved in it for 15 minutes. It is quite impressive.
My dogs are saying hi to my wife, who's now coming home.
Oh.
So yeah, fantastic. Feel free, either of you, to follow up in any way. I'm happy to do other demos like this if you think it's something that somebody else needs to see at your institution or whatnot.
I'd like a download of the video because I need to show it to my ethics instructors. And I also need to show it in general to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, which would have a use for it in their graduate curriculum.
Okay, that's cool. It's used certainly at the grad level.
I have 2 instructors that are joint between myself and Fletcher, and they teach our ethics.
Cool.
So this would be, I think, a transformational technology for ethics across the curriculum. And that's really the wedge that I need for it, because you can't teach ethics without deep thinking. You can't teach ethics without having essays. I really think this is one of those ways of doing it, one of the best ways of doing that.
Excellent. Well, that sounds great. I look forward to any interaction. So we have the formal research project. If that works for people, cool. If it doesn't, not a problem. And we're also very happy just kind of sharing the application, letting you have a good kick of the tires. And if you want to know where things go from there, I'm happy to give any details that way too. So whatever you need, let me know.
I'd like a download of this video that I can then show to a couple of people who are critical to our ethics curriculum.
Yeah,
I want to show it to our teacher of the main ethics course and our teacher of the ethics of robotics and human-robot interaction course. Both of whom I think would think it was a no-brainer for their course.
Excellent. I will send that link to you for sure, and feel free to share it with anybody you'd like to share it with.
Yeah, but this strikes me as a huge labor saver for us. We're not in the same union situation you're in, because our union is very compartmentalized.
Yeah.
Our union covers graduate students and lecturers. It does not cover tenured or tenure track faculty members. It is very compartmentalized.
Interesting.
In that sense.
Yeah.
I think we can deploy this. I don't think they're going to yell about it, because frankly, all our union is asking for is mercy me, give us less grading.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. And especially,
so I don't think they're going to find their jobs to be threatened by peer grading, especially in a situation where we're rolling out a new course, Ethics of Human-Robot Interaction, that currently doesn't have a TA role.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So we're not putting anybody out of a job.
Absolutely. And my claim was too, and I think had I done this a little more proactively, it would have been better. But my claim was, as far as TAs go, do they want to spend all their TAship just learning the skill of grading? It's better to have them out in front of a class and doing some of the teaching and interacting with students and learning some pedagogy than sitting in the back office just providing grades to work.
Yeah.
So I think
I agree completely.
Yeah.
I try to get people before the qualifying exam to teach a bit.
Yeah.
Because that gives them the ability to think on their feet, and it's a skill that takes a while to learn.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's craft. Teaching is a craft, just like, I don't know, playing a music instrument or anything else.
Well, I tell you what, I got to sign off because I actually have to get to another meeting. I apologize for my stupid dental appointment running later.
No problem.
But I got a lot out of the presentation as it was. I was very much, I'm basically a believer in this cycle. I think I would turn it all on.
Yep.
My basic feeling is the the basic idea of thought, grading, and reflection is very much what I would consider to be necessary in these courses.
Yeah, and I have to just add one quick thing before you go. Part of our roadmap is exactly the process you saw, but then adding a final phase of peer assessment, almost like the second one again, where they assess each other's final product, and provide the peer provided mark that way, so that you can still be using the peer averages, but have them go through the whole process before they generate.
Oh, and one other thing, +1 on group work.
Yeah, cool.
Very interested in that.
Yeah, excellent.
We have courses that are actually taught in a group setting with permanent groups.
Yep.
In other words, the 4 people are assigned to a group at a time, and that's their group for the term, and they have to discuss everything on the pedagogical principle that it's much easier to learn something when you talk about it with somebody.
Shock. Peer learning.
You know,
peer learning's powerful.
really easy stuff like that. We are +1 on group work.
And I will just add, from a psychology perspective, that students often hate group work, and the biggest reason that they sometimes hate group work is because of social loafers, people who come and just don't carry their weight. If you simply allow them to anonymously rate the contributions of all the group members to the group project, which is part of our instantiation, once you can't get away with loafing because the other 3 people are all going to say you're a bum. Then you don't loaf, and suddenly group working works the way you and I wish it would work from the get-go. It just provides that extra little motivation to get everything working smooth.
Yeah, that's really important, and we're required to assess group work.
Mm-hmm.
We're ABET accredited, and one of the major issues is group work and group effectiveness, and it is a required assessment.
Yeah.
So this is something that fits perfectly with our way of doing things.
I look forward to more communication around that. That sounds great. The group work is beta, which means we're looking for people to try it and give us advice about how it can be better. It's kind of on our hot plate right now, so it's relatively easy. We got developers chomping at the bit in the background, and if there are good ideas of how to improve it, we can jump right on it and do that too.
I actually have a couple of questions for you that are related to that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, my first question, though, I was just wondering, do you have some documentation? You mentioned that when 5 or 6 or more students rate each other's work, that there's a reliability that puts it within the range of what you can expect a teacher to give.
So there's 2 things. So there's this vision.peerscholar.com. The third paper that you'll see there, Paré and Joordens 2009.
Okay.
That is ours, looking at the peer grades. I almost feel embarrassed about this paper, by the way. I was trained as a cognitive psychologist, and when we wrote this paper, it'll feel like we're using peer assessment simply as a means to get a grade to make people write. I didn't really fully understand the power of the pedagogy. So just keep that in mind. but you'll get what you want. And I'll also very quickly, let me see. I'm going to. Oh, it should have been right here in my recents. Why is it not right here in my recents? Here we go. So let me slide this over. So this is fresh. I think I can just slide. Oh, really? You won't let me just dump this into the comments? Okay, I will send it to you in an email. But what this is us taking this a step further, actually just last fall. So we're checking the reliability of student-provided grades when they apply a rubric, and specifically one of the value rubrics for critical thinking. And so we've kind of redone that study itself. And just to give you a taste, we had experts from AAC&U, that's the people who developed the rubric, and pairs. So we had a pair of experts, pair of teaching assistants. We can get a sense of how much they agree, and then we compared the peer averages. This is a lot of data just to throw at you quick, but we compared peer averages to it, and the punchline is that the peer average agreed with a given TA as much as another TA did. Now the peer averages were a little high. They were biased to be a little high, which is why a lot of the kappas aren't as good as the correlations. But I'm going to send you this paper, and it'll give you the details on that. And it'll also reference that other work I told you about that was justifying the fact that 5 or 6 TAs provides you a good number. So I'll send.
Okay. Yeah, that's fantastic. I really appreciate that because I mean, I agree with Alva completely that part of it is just that we need our students to be writing,
Yeah.
but then to have to grade them, oh my gosh, you know. And I heard somebody say several years ago, they said, you know, the important thing is for the student to write. It's not necessarily for me to have to read it,
Yeah.
Which there's a certain truth behind that.
There is.
While at the same time, if they know that it's not being read, obviously they're not going to put the effort into it that they need to. The other question that I had for you is I have students do debate. So I have a course that has 116 students in it.
Yeah.
And I use the same model that I use for smaller classes, and that is that I actually have the students pair into teams of 3 and actually do a public debate.
Mm-hmm.
Because the class is so big, I have to have them videotape it.
Yeah.
And then we use our video platform. We use Panopto, where they upload their video and then they actually review each other's debates.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if this tool would afford me the opportunity to do that. Last year, I ended up paying for, I forget which tool I used, but so that I could have a really good, clear form so that I could, you know, collect that data.
Yep. 100%. So I'll give you just sort of 2 answers to that. So in this case, you're seeing written work because that's what most people use it for. But in my interest, like 1,700 students, I think students could still be working on oral presentation skills. So I literally say, give your argument, but in spoken form, give it to your cell phone. So, you know, you're free of the social pressures of having people watch you for now in first year, but give it to your cell phone, record it as many times as you want, but then ultimately submit this video of you presenting. And so in that case, people will be looking. I think you see in one of these cases, I think one of the peers embedded a picture, but you can just as easily embed a video. And so they could be going peer by peer, looking at the video and rating it however you want. So I've done that. Now what you're suggesting is a combination of that with the group work so that they work in groups and present videos as groups. But that's
right.
That's exactly what our group work stuff does. So
yeah,
I see no reason that would be
so
a fun use.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You were saying something?
No, I was just saying that would be a really cool use case to try. I would love to see that happen.
Cool. Yeah, and what you were mentioning about the groups, I don't believe in giving group grades just because you do have that loafer and it becomes unjust. So is there a way that I could combine those features so that the group uploads a video,
Mm-hmm.
and it would actually be 6 people in total who are uploading a video because it's the pro and the con side.
Okay. Yeah.
But then they also have to kind of rate each other anonymously.
Yeah, that's exactly. I kind of wish my buddy was here because he built all this out recently. But let's just try adding when we do a group work. That is exactly what we had in mind, is that sort of notion. So when he's got some extra functionality in here. So once again, this would just be you giving them the instructions and setting up the assessment. All of that would be much the same as before. It really sneaks in when you manage the groups. If you have pre-existing groups, you can have them just sort of uploaded through a file, or you can create these groups. I'm curious where he's snuck in. All right, so you can manually allow them to join or switch. I think so this is kind of nice too, by the way. You can have topics where students can join which group they want to be part of. I'm just trying to see the part. So yeah, you can literally create groups and then assign people to groups as you kind of want to do.
Nice.
Or upload with a CSV or just randomize. I think it'll just randomly put them in. My buddy's been building this out like heck, and I haven't been paying as much attention. Anyway, I do know that you can add that. I'm just trying to see where they assess each other, but you can certainly add that, and you can affix it to any step of the process you want. Yeah, I'm just going to have to dig a little. Wow, you and I. So you know what we should do, Scott, if you don't mind, is have another session at some point where Dwayne's kind of the project manager. I do more of the research side of things, and he does more of the building side of things. Um,
Sure.
and he's been building out this group work, and it would be good for me to see him answering all of your questions so that I can learn to answer them better as well. But certainly that's doable. Exactly what you described is doable.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah, clearly built by educators who know the different problems that we have, that we seek resolution for.
Yeah.
And I'm always so impressed with this. Um, uh, what is your time frame in terms of onboarding and things of that nature? Because I'm kind of coming up against the end of the semester,
Yep.
and I mean I'd be certainly very open, from everything I'm seeing, to deploying this basically.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, as far as you using it, you could use it anytime you wanted to use it. Actually, this email or this URL app.peerscholar.com, you can go there, register an account. The only limitation currently, which I'm happy to remove from you as you play around, but the only limitation right now is that it only allows you to have a class size of like 10 students, which is
oh,
fun for testing. But if you just tell me, hey, Steve, I just created a class and it's called X, then I'll happily bump that up to whatever you need, and you can give it a try that way. What I'd love to do is have the integrated version on your LMS because it just works smoother. You don't have to send invites and all that stuff. For that, usually there's a bit of a process. Usually your LMS people, again, most of their questions are answered really well in this docs.peerscholar. So if they have any questions, they want to check it, but usually that takes a little bit of time. As far as you using it, I think you'll find it's quite intuitive. You'll
yeah, it looks
set
like
it
it.
up quick. If you did want to be part of the research study, I mean, I have all these things I'm throwing at you, but these will all be part of the recording too. So
Right.
you'll be able to get back at it. This is just my lab page. And when we are inviting people to be part of our research, participate in research. I forgot to go there. This part sort of describes the research, or especially down here, our higher ed research, what we're doing quite a bit. And so there's a lot of detail there about what we're up to. If you read that and you like that, then the only additional step would be, it's not necessary, but I like it, is to get ethics passed at your institution. We've already got it, and our accepted protocol is right there.
Okay.
And so it's usually relatively easy just to translate those answers to your institutional form, and they're usually very happy if one already accepted it. But if we were going to collect data from your students, that's what we would want to do. So for all of that, we might be talking, next term before we could literally be doing anything research-wise, but using it whenever you want, my friend.
Okay, well, thank you. Yes, it would definitely take to next term for our IRB to
Yeah.
to approve that. So we are very bureaucratic, and also for any integration with our LMS,
Yeah.
because we're
I know.
for a small school, it takes a long time to get.
Yeah. I hear you. I hear you. I think it's like that everywhere. I mean, the good news is it is a little nicer when you can say that for this research project, for example, I think we've got upwards of 50 institutions participating. So it kind of makes them feel a little more comfortable when they know it's already kind of gone through this process several times. But there's still a process.
I'm sure.
There's always a process.
Yeah. So if I use this like in two different courses, the one course has 28 students and the other course has 116. I mean, is that still beneficial to you having me use the system, or am I just kind of draining your resources and you're not getting a benefit this semester?
No, I think it's certainly beneficial. We want to get word out. We'd like to get people using it. So yeah, absolutely. And I should have just pointed out something that I didn't. When you're in the system, and this is true of both students or faculty, this little question mark back in the bottom right corner here. First of all, if you're playing with it for the first time, that help and support will show you how to do some of the basics, adding a course, etc. So that stuff is all in there. And also, for either you or your student, we've got this give feedback or report a bug for your students. We highly recommend that you tell them, hey, if you think you've run into an issue, click on that. Like, don't email me. I don't need to know. Click on that thing, fill out these things, and that puts them directly in contact with us. But it also gives us a little bit of information that we need to, suss out the problem well. And so that's just sort of a benefit for you, that you don't have students emailing you directly, and it allows us to fix their problems quick instead of having it all go through you in a pipeline.
Okay.
But for playing that first one, the help and support, if you play with that app, all you would need to do is just, when you create classes, which will be one of the first things you do, then you adding a course. Once you've done that, just send me an email and say, Steve, I just created 2 courses. They're called this and this, and here's how many students I expect in each.
Okay.
I will up the number of licenses for those courses so that nobody gets asked to pay anything.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This is really exciting.
No problem, Scott. I'm looking forward to seeing your election results now.
Oh boy, I sure am too. I'm kind of sweating it out a little bit.
You are. We're like the little brother looking down at the scale.
At the little brother who's gone insane.
Something like that. I don't know. We're hoping for a bit of sanity tonight. That would be
Yeah, we are too. Anyways.
Well, I look forward to more interactions, Scott. Please feel free to reach out anytime, and I don't mind doing virtual things like this. If it's ever a benefit from your side, just let me know.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Cool.
I'll be in touch. Thanks.
All right. Have a great night.
That's you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.